It's time.
Picture this, a Thursday evening in the fall of 2022. A gated mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the entire American South. Inside that house, a man worth $47 million is standing in his own living room, arms folded across his chest, looking at his wife of 6 years like she is an inconvenience, like she is a problem he has finally decided to deal with. He tells her she has 2 hours to pack what she needs. He tells her the house is his. He tells her the marriage is over. And then, and this is the part I need you to really hear, he leans in, and he says to her with all the contempt he has been storing up for years, "You came from nothing, and that's exactly where you're going back to." She doesn't cry, she doesn't scream, she doesn't beg. She looks at him for a long moment, picks up her one bag, she had only packed one intentionally, and she walks out of that front door with her head high and her shoulders straight. And the moment she reaches the end of that driveway, she pulls out her phone, dials a number, and when the person on the other end picks up, she says just 3 words. She says, "It is time." Her name is Naomi Clarke. And what Derek Calloway, the man standing in that doorway watching her go, already celebrating, did not know, could not have imagined, was that Naomi had not been packing for 2 hours. She had been preparing for 2 years. This is the story of the most catastrophic mistake one man ever made. And the reckoning that followed was so complete, so precise, so devastating, that people in Atlanta's real estate circles are still talking about it today. Before we go any further, we would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city and state in the comments right now. We read every single one. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because we promise you, this one is just the beginning. To understand why what Naomi did was so extraordinary, you first have to understand who Derek Calloway was, and more importantly, who he believed himself to be. Derek was born in 1975 in Marietta, Georgia, the youngest son of a car dealership owner and a real estate agent. He did not grow up poor. He did not build his empire from zero the way he loved to tell people in interviews. He grew up comfortable, well-connected, and accustomed to getting what he wanted without ever being told no. He attended the University of Georgia on a partial scholarship, studied business, and graduated in 1997 with more ambition than patience. He started small, buying distressed single-family homes in outer Atlanta suburbs, renovating them cheaply, flipping them fast. He was good at it. He had a sharp eye for undervalued property and an even sharper instinct for finding buyers willing to pay a premium. By 2005, when the housing market was still booming, Derek had quietly accumulated a portfolio worth close to $12 million. He formed Calloway Properties LLC in 2006, brought in investors, and began moving into commercial real estate development. By 2015, Calloway Properties had completed 14 major developments across Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Derek appeared on the cover of Atlanta Business Chronicle. He gave keynote speeches at real estate summits. He was photographed at charity galas, always smiling, always in a perfectly fitted suit, always with the right people standing next to him. He was the picture of the self-made American success story. Except the picture, as Naomi would later demonstrate in federal court, had been carefully edited. Because Derek Calloway did not build his empire alone, and the person most responsible for keeping that empire legally sound, contractually airtight and financially protected, never once appeared in any of those magazine profiles. That person was his wife. Naomi Clarke was born in 1983 in South Atlanta, specifically a neighborhood called Mechanicsville, about 4 miles from downtown, in a community that most people driving through would not slow down for. Her mother, Gloria Clarke, was a middle school English teacher who wore the same 3 pairs of shoes to work every week and made sure Naomi never once felt the weight of what they did not have. Her father, Robert Clarke, worked maintenance at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport for 22 years. He took double shifts during the Christmas season so Naomi could take the SAT prep course at the Learning Center on Pryor Road. From the time she was 11 years old, Naomi Clarke understood one thing with total clarity. The way out was through her mind. She read everything. She studied obsessively. She graduated valedictorian from South Atlanta High School in 2001. She earned a full academic scholarship to Spelman College, where she majored in political science and graduated magna cum laude in 2005. And then, to the pride of every teacher, neighbor, and church member who had watched her grow up, she was accepted to Harvard Law School on a merit scholarship, the first person from Mechanicsville to ever do it. She graduated from Harvard Law in 2008, right as the financial crisis was swallowing the American economy whole. She clerked for a federal judge in Atlanta for 2 years, then joined a mid-size corporate law firm where she specialized in real estate transactions, contract law and business structuring. She was brilliant, thorough, and almost terrifyingly detail-oriented. Her colleagues said she could read a 100-page contract and identify the one problematic clause on page 67 without needing to highlight a single word. She had a gift, and she knew it. She met Derek Calloway at a charity gala in Buckhead in September 2015. He was 40 years old. She was 32. He walked up to her with that easy confidence that wealthy men in expensive rooms tend to carry, and he said something that genuinely surprised her. He asked her about a recent Georgia Supreme Court ruling on land use rights. Not about her dress, not where she went to school. He wanted to talk about property law at a charity dinner. She found it disarming. She found him interesting. She agreed to dinner the following week. They dated for 8 months. He introduced her to his business. He asked her opinion on contracts, on deal structures, on risk exposure. He treated her intelligence like an asset he was lucky to have access to. She fell in love with the man who saw her, really saw her, not just as a beautiful woman at a party, but as one of the sharpest legal minds in the room. They married in June 2016 at a private ceremony outside Savannah. Her mother cried through the entire reception. Her father danced with her until midnight. It was, by every measure, the happiest day of her life. And for a while it was good. She joined Calloway Properties as in-house legal counsel. She restructured their contracts, renegotiated 3 major vendor agreements that had been hemorrhaging money for years, and helped Derek close a $200 million mixed-use development deal in downtown Atlanta that made the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The headline read, "Calloway closes biggest deal in company history." There was a large photo of Derek shaking hands with the city council rep. Naomi was not in the photograph. She had written the contract. The changes came slowly. So slowly that Naomi, who was trained to notice everything, almost missed them in her own life. It started with the introductions. At business dinners, at conferences, at client meetings, Derek began introducing her differently. Not as his attorney, not as the legal architect of Calloway Properties, just as his wife, the way you introduce someone decorative. The way you introduce someone whose primary function is to look good beside you and refill the conversation when it runs dry. She mentioned it to him once gently on a Sunday morning over coffee. He laughed it off, said she was reading too much into it, said people knew who she was, except they did not, because he had made sure they did not. The company website listed his executive team: Derek Calloway, CEO, Marcus Reed, CFO, James Whitfield, VP of Development. Naomi Clarke Calloway appeared nowhere on that page. When she asked about it in the fall of 2019, Derek told her it was a liability issue, that having a spouse listed as counsel created a conflict of interest. She was a Harvard-trained attorney. She knew that was not a legal reason. It was an excuse. Then came Richard Holt. Richard was Derek's oldest business contact, a commercial real estate developer from Alpharetta, Georgia, who Derek had partnered with on 2 major projects in 2018 and 2019. Richard was 61, loud, the kind of man who laughed at his own jokes before finishing them. The first time Naomi met Richard at a dinner at Bones Restaurant on Piedmont Road, he looked at her, then looked at Derek, and said with a grin on his face like he was being charming, "Well, she's very articulate for someone from where she grew up, isn't she, Derek?" And Derek laughed. He actually laughed. He picked up his wine glass and laughed like Richard had said something worth laughing at. Naomi smiled. She always smiled in those moments. She had learned early in life that the most dangerous thing a black woman can do in a room full of powerful men is let them see how clearly she has understood what they just said. So she smiled, she picked up her own glass, and she filed that moment away in a part of her memory she reserved for things that mattered. Richard Holt would not be the last time. Over the next 18 months there were other comments, other moments, other dinners where Naomi was talked over, talked around, or simply ignored. And each time Derek said nothing, did nothing. He was building a partnership with Richard Holt worth tens of millions of dollars, and he was not going to let his wife's discomfort with dinner conversation get in the way of that. By early 2021, Naomi had begun to understand something that no wife ever wants to understand about her own marriage. She was useful, not loved, useful. Her intelligence, her legal expertise, her professional network, these were assets Derek had access to through the marriage. The moment those assets could be extracted and the liability of the marriage remained, she would become expendable. She had seen this pattern in contract law 100 times. She recognized it now in her own home, and she made a decision: she would not wait for him to move first. The affair started in the summer of 2021. Naomi found out about it in October of that year, not through a suspicious text message, not through a friend who saw something they shouldn't have, but in the most devastating way possible. She came home early from a legal conference in Charlotte on a Friday afternoon, walked through the front door of the Buckhead mansion, and found a woman's coat draped over the chair in the foyer. A coat she had never seen before, a coat that was not hers. She stood at the bottom of the staircase for 6 minutes. She counted the seconds. She heard voices from the master bedroom, Derek's voice, low and comfortable, the way people sound when they believe they are completely alone and completely safe. She did not go up those stairs. She turned around, walked back through the front door, sat in her car in the driveway and made 2 phone calls. The first was to her sister, Danielle, in Charlotte. The second was to Marcus Webb, her closest friend from Harvard Law, now a civil rights attorney in Washington, D.C. She told Marcus everything she suspected, everything she had noticed, everything she had been quietly documenting for the past several months. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Send me what you have, all of it. And Naomi, stop going back inside that house without your phone recording." Because here is what Naomi had not yet told anyone, not even Danielle. For the previous 8 months, while Derek assumed she was simply working late and focusing on her own small consulting practice she had started on the side, Naomi had been doing something else entirely. She had been auditing every deal Calloway Properties had touched since 2018, every contract, every wire transfer, every shell company Derek and Richard Holt had quietly established through a series of holding companies registered in Delaware. She had legal access to all of it. She was still in-house counsel, her name still on the operating agreements, and what she found made the affair almost irrelevant by comparison. Almost. The woman in the Buckhead mansion that Friday afternoon, by the way, was Whitney Holt, Richard Holt's 29-year-old daughter, the daughter of the man who had called Naomi, articulate for someone from where she grew up, and Derek had been seeing her for 8 months while his wife was quietly building a federal-level case against his company. You genuinely cannot write this, except it is real. After the October discovery, Naomi made a choice that most people in her position would not have had the discipline to make. She went back home. She continued showing up to dinners. She continued reviewing contracts when Derek asked her to. She continued being his wife in every visible, surface-level way, while underneath, with extraordinary precision, she completed what she had started. She rented a small office space in Midtown Atlanta under her maiden name. She hired a private investigator named Bernard Cole, a 20-year FBI veteran who now ran his own firm out of Sandy Springs. She retained Marcus Webb formally as co-counsel on a civil complaint she was preparing, and she began the process that would ultimately change everything. What Naomi had uncovered through her months of auditing was not just marital misconduct. It was systematic financial predation. She found documented evidence that Calloway Properties and Holt Development Group, Richard Holt's company, had been coordinating to deliberately suppress property valuations in predominantly black neighborhoods across South Atlanta, including parts of Mechanicsville, the neighborhood where Naomi herself had grown up. They would identify a block, get it appraised low through a compliant appraiser they had a financial relationship with, acquire the properties cheaply, often from elderly homeowners or families in financial distress, and then flip them for massive profit after rapid development. They had done this on at least 11 documented occasions between 2018 and 2021. They had displaced an estimated 230 families. They had also been using Calloway Properties' charitable foundation, the Calloway Community Trust, which Derek promoted heavily on social media and in press releases, as a partial shield. They made small donations to neighborhood organizations in the same communities they were systematically acquiring. It created the appearance of community investment while the actual practice was extraction. Naomi had the wire transfers. She had the internal emails. She had the appraisal records. She had everything. Bernard Cole had obtained additional evidence through surveillance and public records requests that corroborated her findings. And Marcus Webb in Washington had already had 2 preliminary conversations with attorneys in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. There was one more piece. And this one is the part that Derek Calloway would later call, through his attorneys, an act of betrayal. During the marriage, Derek had asked Naomi to establish a series of legal trusts that would hold the intellectual property, brand licensing rights, and several core real estate holdings for Calloway properties. He asked her to do this because he trusted her legal competence. He knew she would structure them correctly, efficiently, and in a way that minimized tax exposure. What he did not account for was the fact that Naomi, acting entirely within the scope of her authority as the trust's establishing attorney and named trustee, had structured those trusts with a specific dissolution provision. In the event of marital dissolution, the trust assets, including licensing rights and 3 core properties, would revert to a designated non-profit entity. The non-profit's name, the Clarke Foundation, registered in Georgia in March 2021, its executive director, Naomi Clarke. Every document was signed, every notarization was legitimate. Derek's own business attorneys had reviewed the trust agreements when they were filed and raised no objections, because on the surface they appeared to be standard asset protection structures. Naomi had not hidden anything. She had simply been extremely precise about what she built, and Derek had been too arrogant to read carefully what his wife had put in front of him. October 14, 2022, a Thursday, Naomi later told her sister that she had actually known it was coming that week. Derek had been colder than usual, more distracted. He had been on the phone with his attorney twice that she could hear. On Thursday evening he came home at 7:30 and Whitney Holt was with him. They walked through the front door together, and Naomi was already seated in the living room calm, a glass of water in her hand, as if she had been waiting, which she had. Derek told her it was over, that he wanted a divorce, that she needed to leave the house that night. He said the house was purchased before their marriage under his company's name, which was partially true, though legally complicated by the renovations Naomi had overseen and partially funded. He told her she could take her personal belongings and that his attorneys would be in touch about the rest. Whitney Holt stood in the hallway the entire time and said absolutely nothing. She just watched. The daughter of the man who thought Naomi was articulate for someone from where she came from, standing in Naomi's home, watching her be dismissed. Naomi packed one bag, she walked out the front door, and at the end of that driveway under a Georgia night sky she called Marcus Webb in Washington. She told him it was time. He already knew what to do. The complaint had been ready for 6 weeks. They had simply been waiting for Derek to make his final move. He had just made it. 3 weeks later, on November 7, 2022, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a front-page story that had nothing to do with Derek Calloway's divorce. The headline read, "Federal Civil Rights Complaint Filed Against Calloway Properties and Holt Development for Predatory Acquisition Practices in Majority Black Atlanta Neighborhoods." The complaint, filed by attorney Marcus Webb on behalf of a coalition of former residents and community organizations, was 240 pages long. It included internal emails, wire transfer records, appraisal documentation, and testimony from displaced families. It was one of the most comprehensive fair housing complaints filed in the state of Georgia in a decade. The story went national within 48 hours. NBC News picked it up. The Washington Post ran a follow-up. A civil rights advocacy organization in Washington held a press conference citing the complaint. Former residents of the affected neighborhoods began coming forward. Elderly homeowners who had sold their properties for prices they now understood to have been deliberately suppressed gave interviews. A 73-year-old woman named Louise Patterson, who had lived in Mechanicsville for 40 years before selling her home to a Calloway subsidiary in 2019, appeared on CNN and said, quietly and with absolute dignity, that she had not understood what was happening until it was too late. That interview was shared 400,000 times in 24 hours. Derek Calloway responded the way powerful men always respond when they are cornered. He went on offense. He appeared at a press conference flanked by 5 attorneys and called the complaint a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by a bitter ex-wife with a personal vendetta. He denied all wrongdoing. He said Naomi had misappropriated company funds, a claim his team backed with documentation of a wire transfer of $340,000 from a Calloway Properties account to an account in Naomi's name. For about 72 hours, it looked like the story might be shifting, like there was another side, like maybe Naomi wasn't entirely the wronged party she appeared to be. And then Naomi gave one interview. She sat across from a journalist at a conference table in her attorney's office in Washington, D.C., wearing a plain grey blazer, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what she always wore. She answered every question calmly and in complete sentences. When she was asked about the wire transfer, the one Derek's team was calling embezzlement, she smiled very slightly and said, "That transfer was a documented, authorized movement of funds to a trust I established as part of my legal responsibilities as in-house counsel. Derek's own attorneys approved the trust agreement in writing in March of 2021. I have the correspondence. My attorneys have provided it to federal investigators. I'd invite anyone to read it carefully." She paused, then she said, "I don't want revenge, I want accountability." Those 5 words became the most shared clip of the week. Women across the country put it in their Instagram stories. It trended on Twitter for 2 days. The comment section of every platform that ran that clip was filled with women, particularly black women, but genuinely women of every background, who said those 5 words captured something they had been trying to articulate for years. The $340,000 embezzlement was, exactly as Naomi said, a fully documented, legally authorized trust transfer, something Derek's own attorneys had signed off on. The story collapsed within a week. In January 2023, during the discovery phase of the federal civil investigation, investigators obtained Calloway Properties' internal communications going back to 2018. What they found in those emails changed the entire scope of the case. There were communications between Derek Calloway and Richard Holt discussing their acquisition strategy in explicit terms. There were references to target neighborhoods described as underperforming and ripe for repositioning, language that sounded neutral until you looked at the map and saw that every single one of those neighborhoods was majority black. And then there was the email that Naomi's attorneys read aloud in a legal deposition in March 2023. An email Derek Calloway had sent to Richard Holt in September 2021, 1 month before Naomi discovered the affair. In that email, Derek wrote about Naomi in the context of the business. "She's smart, but she's not one of us. She'll never see it coming." She saw everything coming, every single thing. The federal investigation resulted in Calloway Properties being assessed civil penalties totaling $22 million. The Georgia Real Estate Commission suspended Derek's broker license pending the outcome of additional proceedings. Richard Holt's company settled a parallel civil lawsuit brought by displaced residents, a lawsuit that Naomi's legal network had helped organize and partially fund through the Clarke Foundation, for an undisclosed sum that multiple sources placed in the range of $8 million. Whitney Holt, according to people close to her, ended her relationship with Derek within 4 months of the investigation going public. Richard Holt retired from active business in the spring of 2023 and gave no public statement. Derek Calloway's empire, the one he had spent 20 years building, or rather, the one Naomi had spent 6 years keeping legally protected, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization in August 2023. The assets most central to the company's valuation, the intellectual property, the brand licensing rights, and 3 core development properties, had already reverted, pursuant to the trust dissolution provisions Naomi had written in 2021, to the Clarke Foundation. Derek's attorneys challenged it. They challenged it aggressively in court for 5 months. They lost. Every judge who reviewed the trust documentation reached the same conclusion. It was legal, it was airtight, and it had been approved by Derek's own legal team years before any of this began. Most people, after surviving what Naomi survived, would be forgiven for simply walking away, taking what was legally hers, moving somewhere beautiful, and never thinking about Derek Calloway or Buckhead or any of it again. She had the resources to do exactly that. She had won completely, decisively, publicly. She had earned the right to rest. Instead, in the spring of 2023, the Clarke Foundation broke ground on a 32-unit affordable housing development in Mechanicsville, the same neighborhood where Naomi grew up. The development was built on a parcel of land that Calloway Properties had been quietly trying to acquire since 2020, the land that had been in the trust, the land that was now hers. The development was completed in 14 months. 32 families moved in. The average rent was set at 30% of the Atlanta area median income, protected by a 30-year deed restriction. Several of the families who moved in were families who had been displaced from that same neighborhood by the exact kind of predatory acquisition Naomi had exposed. The Clarke Foundation also opened a legal aid center on the ground floor of the development, staffed by 3 full-time attorneys who specialize in housing rights and tenant protection. Naomi recruited two of those attorneys directly from law school, both black women, both on partial scholarships she funded. She told them on their first day that the most important thing a lawyer can do with their training is use it in service of people who were never supposed to have access to it. In September 2024, Naomi was invited to keynote the National Housing Equity Conference in Washington, D.C., the same city where Marcus Webb had helped her file the complaint that started everything. She stood at that podium in front of an audience of housing advocates, policymakers, attorneys, and community organizers, and she spoke for 45 minutes about what systemic housing discrimination actually looks like from the inside. About how it hides behind press releases and charitable foundations and suits that fit perfectly, about the families it erases, about what it costs people who will never give an interview or trend on Twitter. She closed her remarks with a line that brought the room to its feet. She said, "The most dangerous thing in the world is a black woman who has decided she is done asking for permission." She did not smile when she said it. She just stood there still and let it land. Because she had earned every single syllable. Derek Calloway gave one final interview in the fall of 2023 to a small Atlanta business publication. He said he had no regrets. He said the investigation was overblown. He said he was focused on the future. The comment section underneath that interview was not kind. Nobody was particularly surprised. Here is what I want you to sit with after this story. Derek Calloway had every advantage this society hands out: money, connections, race, gender. He had all of it working for him. And he looked at a woman who was smarter, more disciplined, and more principled than he would ever be, a woman who had climbed from Mechanicsville to Harvard Law on pure determination, and he decided she was disposable. He decided she was decoration. He said, in writing, that she would never see it coming. And the reason he believed that, the reason he said it so confidently, without hesitation in a work email, is because this world told him his whole life that people like him don't have to worry about people like her, that the Naomis of the world can be used and discarded and replaced. He was wrong. He was catastrophically, expensively, permanently wrong. And what makes Naomi Clarke's story so important, what separates it from a simple story about personal revenge, is what she did with the win. She did not disappear into a penthouse somewhere. She went back to Mechanicsville. She built homes on land that had been taken. She opened doors for women who were just starting the climb she had already completed. She turned her own wound into a foundation, literally. That is not a woman who got even. That is a woman who got free. And then used her freedom to free other people. So I want to ask you something before you go. How many Naomis do you know? How many people in your life, women especially, are right now being underestimated by someone who thinks their talent, their labor, their love can be extracted and then discarded without consequence? How many people are right now being told in one way or another that they came from nothing and that's where they're going back to? And how many of them are quietly, patiently, precisely, preparing their response? If this story moved you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it today. And if you are new to this channel, subscribe right now, because next week we are telling the story of a woman who was written out of her own mother's will by a stepfamily that had absolutely no idea what she had already put in motion. That story is coming. Trust me when I tell you, you do not want to miss it. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.